Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today I'm going to show you exactly how to measure yourself so that way when you're buying a pattern, you buy the correct size. And I'm going to help you troubleshoot what happens when your measurements don't all fit into one size perfectly. Your bust might be in the 8 category, your waist might be in the 12 category, etc. So what do? Well, sometimes we go with our biggest size and cut it out and sew it up, and it does not fit right in multiple ways. And I'm going to show you how to avoid that and get perfect fitting clothes every single time. And it is so easy. So make sure you follow along, and I'm going to go over exactly what you need to do. We want to make sure that all the work we're putting into creating this garment actually pays off. We want a garment that fits us the first time we sew it up. Also, if you're not already a subscriber to Sewing Anastasia, make sure you click on the notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out. I put out new videos every single week, and they're all about sewing. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, I also teach sewing classes in my design studio here in Chicago, Illinois, and virtually. So if you want to check those out, hop on over to sewinganastasia.com. So the first thing we need to do is take proper measurements. So grab that measuring tape, and we're going to measure the bust, the waist, and the hips. Now sometimes this gets a little confusing because people are like, well, I wear my pants here, so I'm going to measure here. But actually, we're going to measure the natural waist, and I'm going to show you exactly where to find your hips. The first measurement we're going to do is your bust. So take your tape measure, wrap it around you, pull it to the front so you can see it. Make sure you have the right end facing forward. Okay. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that the tape measure isn't sloping down in the back. You want to keep it horizontal. And then for the front, you want to make sure it's going over your apex, which is your nipple. So make sure that the tape measure is passing through the biggest point of your bust, which should be where your nipple is. So make sure you're not measuring the above chest or below your bust. You really want to make sure you're measuring right across your nipples. So if we go ahead and make sure, you want to make sure it's tight. We don't want to make sure, you don't want to pull it, and you don't want a bunch of ease in it. So make sure this is a fitted measurement across your bust. And so it looks like mine's 33.5. So I'm going to write down this measurement so that way I can go back and look at the chart later. Next, you're going to measure your waist. Now, how do we find the natural waist? The easiest way is to act like a teacup and bend to the side. And where your body indents is your natural waist. So we want to measure at the natural waist point because this is the measurement the size chart is referring to. So we're going to go ahead and go around the natural waist, and you want this to fit comfortably. You don't want it to be pulling super tight, but you want this to be a nice snug measurement, just laying flat with your body. So it looks like we have about 25.5 for the waist measurement. So I'm going to write this down so I can refer to it later. Next, we're going to measure the hips. The hips is the biggest point on your body. So it could be a little lower or higher depending on how your body is shaped. So you really want to make sure you're going with the biggest part of your butt or your hips, depending on the body. So naturally, they're usually about 9 inches down from the waist, just to give you an idea. But let's go ahead and measure the biggest part of my booty here. So I've got some layers on. So we want to take that into account. And I've got it going across my butt here, the biggest part. And now we're going to take a look at the measurement, and we're at about 36 for the hips. So I'm going to write this down, and next we're going to take a look at that measurement chart. And some of my measurements don't fit anywhere. They're in between sizes. So let's take a look at it. So if we take a look at the chart here, my bust measurement was in between the 10 and the 12 at 33.5. So if this happens, you always want to go with the bigger one, and then you can take in the pattern. But if you have a stretchy knitwear garment, I would go with the smaller one. So for the waist, we are in between the 10 and the 12 again. Again, if it's a stretchy garment, you can go with the smaller size. If it's woven, you want to go with the bigger size. And then 36 for the hips, so we're a solid 12 in that for the hips. So what we want to do is always go with your biggest measurement and choose that size. So So since it was 36, we would go with the size 12 here, and then we would take it in for the bust and the waist. So basically, my measurements ended up falling into the 12, which I can take in. But let's say your bust was a 16, your waist was an 18, and your hips were a 20. How do we account for this? How do we measure the pattern, and how do we grade it out naturally? Follow along and I'm going to show you. So the first measurement I'm going to take on the pattern is going to be the bust measurement. So we are going to measure the front and the back bodice. But first, I like to draw in the seam allowance. So you need to figure out what the seam allowance is on your pattern. On this commercial pattern, it's 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to pencil in my seam allowance so I know I'm measuring from one finished seam to another. So I'm going to be drawing in the seam allowance for center back here, which is cut 2 because there's a zipper in this pattern. Okay, so we can see that this is my 5/8 here. And now I need to know where my 5/8 is for the side seam. So I'm going to come in where the 16 is because that's what the bust measurement was. Now we're gonna come in 5/8 on the side seam compared to the 16 line. So this here was the line I came over the 5/8 from. Now what we wanna do is measure from center back to that underarm seam. And you can just go ahead and draw a line across your paper. Okay, and it looks like it ends up about 10 1/4. So we can just draw on the paper with our pencil, so 10 1/4. And now we're gonna do the exact same thing for the front bodice. So essentially what I'm doing is figuring out the garment's finished measurements. So that way I can compare them to the measurements I want to make the garment. And you can also figure out this way how much ease is in it. And do you want to get rid of some of that ease? So let's take in the pattern so that way we don't have to take in the fabric later. You might be wondering, why not just measure from the blue line to the blue line? Well, you totally can, but you have to make sure you're taking off your seam allowance because that seam allowance ends up on the inside of your garment and has nothing to do with the finished measurement. So make sure you're not measuring your seam allowance when you're measuring your paper pattern to get your finished garment size. Now that you know how to find the garment's final measurements by measuring in between the seam allowances, I'm going to show you how to blend out to another size. Now this could go bigger or it could go smaller. So now that we know our bust is the 16 and our waist is the 18, we are going to blend out from the 16 bust to the 18 waist. So because we have a fitted waist and then we have a skirt piece here that's fitting into the waist, we can't just go ahead and cut a 20 in the skirt and a 16 in the top because they're not going to fit back together. So think of this as a puzzle that has to fit back together. So we're going to be blending from the underarm to the waist to the 18, and then we're gonna blend out for the hips to the 20. This is easier than it even sounds. Basically, we're measuring from point to point and blending it together with a diagonal line with your ruler. So this line here is our 16, and this line down here is our 18. So we wanna blend from this point at the waist up to the armhole. And now you can see that this line is our new side seam line. So now you can see that we have the 16 at the bust and we've blended down to the 18 at the waist. Now I'm gonna grab the peplum skirt pattern and we're gonna blend from waist to hip. And by doing this, the skirt of the peplum is going to fit into the waist of the bodice. So now I have the peplum pattern and we are gonna come over to the 18 because that's what we blended to on the bodice at the waist. So this here is the waist. And now we're gonna come and blend down to the 20 at the hips here. So we are gonna go from that 18 to the 20. And now that is our new cutting line when we cut out this pattern. So let's take a look at what we just did. So we went from the 16 in the bust to the 18 at the waist for the bodice. And then for the piece that fits into the bodice, we start at the 18 and then we blended to the 20 for the hip. So now this is going to fit the body going from size 16, 18 to 20. So this is a real easy way to change the size of your pattern so that way they fit you. And you can blend this in any direction, bigger, smaller, in the middle, and then out. So whatever your measurements are, you can make these patterns fit you better. If you really want to make sure that this garment and this pattern is going to fit you perfectly, go ahead and figure out the finished measurements. Just remember to measure your sewing seams and not the edge of your seam allowance seams. And then this will give you a perfect fitting garment because you know exactly what size it's going to be after it's sewn up. Thanks so much for watching Sew Anastasia today. I hope you enjoyed how to measure yourself. Look at the chart on the back of a pattern and adjust the pattern to your measurements. If you have any questions on this process, leave it down below and I would love to get back with you as soon as I can. And don't forget to add me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and TikTok and all those fabulous social media websites, so that way we can stay connected and creative together. And don't forget to hit the notification bell on YouTube, so that way you know when all my new videos come out every single week. So many sewing videos, so awesome. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing. Also, I would love to know what kind of videos you guys would like to see this year. So make sure you leave it down in the comments so that way I can make a video about it. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.